Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about away jobs, something which I have a lot of experience in. So when you've gotten the call from an archaeological company saying that they want to hire you, by the way, congratulations on that, you will then be given some details about the job that they are hiring you for. And one of these details will be whether or not it is a stay-at-home or an away job, which are pretty self-explanatory. A stay-at-home job will involve the fact that you are within a commutable distance from your house, and you will either be expected to arrive on site by yourself or be provided with transport back and forth from site every day, and you get to stay at home. Pretty simple. An away job is obviously the opposite of that, where wherever you're going to be working is more than usually about 2 hours away from wherever you're living, meaning that at the beginning and end of every day, you're gonna have a really long drive. So in this day and age where we don't want to be running employees into the ground, you'll then be staying overnight away from home for the duration of your work week on that project. These jobs occur a lot of the time in archaeology because you cannot bring the archaeology to you, you have to go to it. For example, I went through all the projects that I have worked on in the past 2.5 years in the UK, and of those jobs, only 31% of them were what would be classified as at-home jobs. A couple of them were actually in Edinburgh, and some of them were just kind of on the outskirts. Alternately, when I worked in Canada, pretty much, again, all of the jobs that I worked were away jobs. There was one instance where I did one that was commutable, so it was about an hour's drive at the beginning and end of every day to get to this site, but I wasn't driving, didn't matter much to me. I learned to sleep in a car. So away jobs are really great in that they let you travel for work. And you get to see places that you wouldn't normally choose to go see on your own. Personally have done a walkover within the Cairngorms of the Highlands, and so I essentially got paid to hike over these beautiful mountains in the Highlands. Weather-wise, it was not that great, but experience-wise, I wouldn't have normally been able to do that or maybe planned to do that, and being able to have that experience was really great. The other great thing about this is, if you were traveling to these places on your own time, you would then have to be paying to stay overnight and pay for food and all that kind of stuff, pay for petrol. If you're doing it for work, all of those things are taken care of. If you're doing an away job, generally the company is going to be paying for your accommodation as well as subsistence, and you will be provided with a ride, or if you are driving yourself, you'll be provided with petrol and likely a car in order to get there. In a lot of ways, this is a really good way to save money. When I worked in Canada, the amount of money that we got for food, which is called subsistence, was way more than I actually ended up spending on food, and because of the way that it worked, it was actually tax-free. So I came home every week with an extra couple $100s in my wallet, which was a really great way for me to save to move to the UK. I also have a friend herself who basically used her subs or subsistence to help her save up and so that she could eventually buy a house. So you can actually end up saving a lot of money from it because, you know, you're not at home, so and if you live by yourself, that means you're not using any of your hydro, electric, gas, whatever. You're only having to pay for your own food when you're home on the weekends, so it saves you a lot of money that way. So it can actually end up being a really good benefit for you, especially when you're first starting out in archaeology. The downside to doing an away job is just that it makes it a bit difficult to plan your life. I've talked about this a little bit before, but it gets a bit difficult sometimes to cram everything into the weekend between seeing friends, you know, having to pick up anything that you need in town, seeing a doctor that's going to be closed on the weekends, going to dentists, having appointments, that kind of stuff. You can always work around it, but it just kind of adds an extra wrench into things whenever you're trying to plan something. What can you expect out of accommodation when you're staying on an away job? I've always found this to be a real mixed bag. I've stayed in some really, really great places for work, and I've stayed in some really shitty places that I use as hilarious anecdotes now to kind of to tell people about when they ask me about my job. A lot of the time, obviously, the place that is booked is going to be constrained by the budget, and the person that's booking this place is usually not the person that has to stay there, which, you know, on average, you as an archaeologist, you're not going to be expected to book your own accommodation, but in my experience, when the archaeologist themselves has been in charge of booking it, it's turned out a lot better than when you have an admin person behind a desk who's been told to essentially find the cheapest place possible. Accommodation generally for me has been better in the UK than it has been when I worked in Canada, because in Canada I was expected most of the time, unless we had uneven numbers on the team, to share a room with another girl. Whereas here in the UK, one of the improvements that's been made in archaeology in the past couple years is that generally nowadays you are not going to be expected to share a room with somebody. The closest I've ever come to doing that is an accommodation where there was perhaps 1 or 2 separate bedrooms and then a loft bedroom as well, and I personally just chose to stay in the loft bedroom because I'm really not fussed about stuff. The justification for this, for a lot of people, is the fact that if I am paying at home to have my own bed and my own bathroom and my own kitchen and stuff, I should have at least some of the equivalent of that while I'm staying away, which most of the time comes down to having your own bedroom and usually your own bathroom. So if you're somebody that's a bit anxious about if you're going to be asked to stay with another person, generally when you're working in the UK, the answer is no. This can sometimes contribute to not having such a good place to stay. The usual places that you'll end up staying in are like a typical B&B. I've stayed in a couple hotels, I've stayed in motels, and I've also stayed a couple times in holiday homes. When I was working in Lincoln, I was actually living in what I would call student accommodation. I'm living in student accommodation for this job here as well. Basically anywhere that's available to rent, they will. When you receive all the details from a company about the job, where you're going to be staying, all that, make sure that you ask whether or not it's going to be catering or self-catering accommodation. Again, this is pretty self-explanatory. Self-catering accommodation means that you will be provided with some kind of kitchen facilities in order to cook your own meals. Self-catering places that you stay usually end up being either a B&B or a holiday home. And then on the other hand, you have a catered, quote unquote, accommodation. This is where there will not be kitchen facilities for you to cook your own meals. So in terms of that, it will usually be breakfast provided in some kind of way, and then you'll either have to pick up lunch on your way to work or figure something else out so that you're getting lunch every day, and then after work you will have to go out to a restaurant for dinner. Catering places that you usually stay would be like hotels. The other part of an away job is what kind of subsistence money you're getting. So this is essentially pay to kind of help compensate you for the fact that you will be living away from home. The short form that people call it is subs, and there is not a lot of legislation around this. So companies at their own behest can set how much subsistence they want to give you, and then as well how they're going to go about giving you. The amount of money that you receive will also differ between a self-catering and a catering job, and it changes wherever you work. Some companies like to really do it on the cheap, and some companies are much more relaxed about it. Usually you receive over here in the UK somewhere between 10 to 15 pound, and for every day that you work. So you'll receive 5 days. Some companies might only do it for the amount of days that you're actually staying overnight away. So that would be 4 nights, so 4 days worth of stuff. But again, it just varies wherever you go. Like I said, different companies have different policies, and it's always good to check what this is when you kind of first start out with them. An example of kind of the differing policies between company would be, say if you only spent £3 on your lunch, those £2 went back to the company. And then similarly, if you didn't spend the full £10 on your dinner, which is hard to do because the average main nowadays costs over £10, you would have again had to send that money back to the company. You weren't allowed to use any of this money to buy alcohol. You would, on a self-catering job I did for a similar company, you weren't allowed to buy toiletries either, so you had to bring all of your own toothpaste and whatever, and if you forgot it, you would have to pay out of your own pocket. So that's an example of somebody that's a bit more stingy about subsistence. Alternately, another company that I've worked for that was a little bit more generous, the breakfast was provided by the hotel that we were staying at, and then we stopped at the grocery store for lunch every day, and we went out every night for dinner. Unlike the other job, we didn't have a set limit for the amount of money that we could actually spend. There was more just kind of this general rule of just like, be reasonable. So nobody really would have spent over £5 for their lunch, and then as well, at dinner, the place that we ended up going generally had a deal for like, you know, a starter and a main, or a main and a dessert for like $9.99, $12.99, something like that. So you could actually end up getting 2 courses for that. And then as well, you could actually have 1 alcoholic beverage on the company, or 1 on the company drink on the company's bill. Now, to be fair to the company that had a tighter budget, they are a much bigger archaeological company, and they are only an archaeological company. The other company I worked for was part of a bigger corporation, so I think sometimes their rules are partially because of the other profession that they worked with, which brings in, I think, more money than archaeology does, so they could afford to be a bit more generous about it. But yeah, different companies have different policies, and if you don't like a policy at one company, go to another one. Always, obviously, whenever you get the first phone call for a job, it's always good to ask what the policy is going to be and what kind of accommodation you're going to be staying in and what the catering is going to be like. So away jobs usually also fall under the umbrella of being short-term jobs. They're not really expected to go on longer than a couple of months, and they are usually a decent distance from wherever you're living in order for you to go home for the weekend. Jobs like the one that I was working on in Lincoln and the one that I'm working on now don't fall into that category. They are very large infrastructure projects that are going on for a year or more. The Lincoln project had about 60 staff, and the one that I'm on right now has somewhere between 200 and 300. I'm not sure of the exact numbers. Generally, these kinds of jobs are going to be different from a typical away job in that companies can kind of pick and choose more about whether or not they're going to be offering accommodation and subsistence based upon kind of usually how desperate they are going to be for people to come to wherever the job is. When I was working in Lincoln, the amount of staff that they needed on the project weren't living anywhere within their vicinity. So they needed to have something to attract people to come to the job, and that was the fact that they were offering subsistence and accommodation. The job that I'm on currently is much closer to London, and there are a lot more archaeologists within the radius for this job. So when they would have tendered, they would have kind of assumed that they could staff it based upon the people that were just within a good radius of the job, and therefore did not tender including the cost of accommodation and subsistence for their workers, and therefore they have not offered that to people on this job. Also, because of just the huge size and the duration of this project, they have asked people that are applying for it to actually move to where the project is, which if they can guarantee that you're going to be here for a year or more, is usually a pretty good idea to do anyway. As there are more infrastructure projects coming and they're getting bigger and bigger, HS2 as everybody likes to talk about, you have to consider that you might be expected to move for a job. They will, in these cases, provide support for you in order to do that, so they usually will put you up somewhere for like 2 weeks and give you some kind of compensation while you find a house. Okay guys, that was my quick explanation of what doing an away job will entail for you as an archaeologist. As per usual, my social media is down below in the description box, so if you are interested, please follow me on Twitter or Instagram. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions for me, please put them down below in the comments section. And if you want to see more from me, please subscribe. Just a quick heads up that next week I won't be doing a video because my partner is visiting me, so I'm going to be busy spending time with him on the weekend. But I have another video planned that I want to do, which is going to be kind of a sequel to this one, in that I'm going to talk about things that you should pack for when you're doing away jobs, because I know the first time that I showed up for an away job for archaeology, I did not pack everything that I needed, and I regretted it. So I want to give you some tips about things that you can do to make your life a little bit easier when you're going away on away jobs. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time. Bye!